Today we're making a decadent chocolate cherry bread that's soft, sweet, and packed with rich chocolate flavor and juicy cherries, all made effortlessly in a bread machine. Hello, you bread machine lovers, bakers, homemakers. Welcome to Butterfly Meadows Homestead. I'm Dorinda, and today I'm going to show you how to make this decadent chocolate cherry loaf of bread in the bread machine. Let's go over the ingredients you're going to need to make this delicious, decadent chocolate cherry bread in the bread machine. You're going to need 3 cups of bread flour, 1/3 of a cup of oil, 1/3 of a cup of white sugar, 1½ teaspoons of salt. This is pink Himalayan salt. 1 teaspoon of vanilla. I'm using clear vanilla, but you can use any kind of vanilla you want to use. And 1 tablespoon of yeast. I have here a ½ cup of cherry pie filling. And when I dipped out the pie filling, I tried to get as many cherries as I could instead of just the gel that is in with the pie filling. So I tried to get as many cherries in my ½ cup as I could. And I also have a ½ cup of mini chocolate chips. So I like to use the minis. You can use the regular size chips if you want to, but I just think the minis are better when you're doing something like a bread. And I have 1/3 of a cup of cocoa powder. And here I have some milk. Now, how much milk we're going to need, I'm going to show you how to measure that as we put our ingredients in our machine. So we're going to be baking this in the bread machine. So we have our bread pan and we need to oil our paddle. And what I always do is I take the paddle and the whole end, I dip it down in my oil. Then I put it on the stem and make sure it comes off easily. That way I can take the paddle out when the time comes and I won't have that enormous hole in my bread. So the first thing after we do that, the next thing we want to do is we want to measure our liquids. Now, the liquids for this bread are a little bit trickier to measure because we are using the cherry pie filling for an enrichment. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to put the cherry pie filling into our cup, our measuring cup. And then we want to measure 1 1/3 cups of liquid. So we're going to add milk until we get up to 1 1/3. So I'm not sure how much milk that is all together, and it really depends on how you measured your cherries and how much cherry pie filling you are using. So you could use less or maybe a little bit more, probably wouldn't hurt, but you wouldn't want to use too much more. And then fill your measuring cup up to 1 1/3. Now, when this bread begins to mix, we may find that we need to add more flour if it's too wet, or we may find then we need to add more liquid if it's too dry. So we have some milk reserved here. If it's too dry, we can add that. But when you're using an enrichment like fruit, sometimes you have to adjust once the dough begins to come together. So keep that in mind. So here we have our liquids, and we're going to go ahead and pour that into our pan. And now we're going to go ahead and put in our oil and our sugar and our salt, our vanilla, and our yeast. And we are using a tablespoon of yeast because this bread has more sugar in it, and that sometimes will cause the yeast to have a hard time doing its job because this is like a really heavy bread. So we're using an entire tablespoon, and we're going to add our cocoa. We're just going to stir that around a little bit. It'll mix up when the bread starts mixing. We're not going to put our chocolate chips in yet. but we are going to go ahead and add our bread flour. So now that we have everything in our bread pan, we're going to go ahead and put it in the bread machine. We're just going to set our bread pan in and twist in. This is KBS bread machine, and it twists a lot. Some of the bread machines, you just pop it down in. This is a 2-pound loaf that we are making. So like I do with all of my breads, I am first going to go to menu option number 11. And I'm going to allow this dough to mix. Now in a couple of minutes, I'm going to check the consistency of the dough. So we're just checking to see how the dough is mixing along. I'm going to scrape off the sides. Don't be afraid to get in your bread machine and check your dough ball and scrape down those sides. Just because it's a bread machine does not mean that you can't help things. Now this is very dry, which I kind of thought that would be, but I just wanted to show you the correct way to measure your liquids, because if I just assume, oh, it's going to be this dry or it's going to be that dry, I might end up with a too wet of a dough. And I think that's much worse than when your dough is too dry, when you have to add more flour, because that increases the volume of the bread loaf and can cause other problems. So I'm going to add, I'm going to start with about a tablespoon or more of milk. And give that a moment to mix around, and then we will check the consistency again. So it's been mixing a couple of minutes. I just wanted to show you best I can what the dough ball is looking like. It still looks, when you first look at it, it still looks a little dry. But because I know those cherries have to work in and the cocoa has to absorb the liquid and everything, I'm going to give it a couple more minutes because I don't want to make it too wet. I'm going to let it mix. What we're looking for is a nice smooth dough ball. So let's let it go, and then we'll look at it again here in a couple of minutes. So we've let it mix for a couple more minutes, and when I press on the dough ball, it's still pretty firm in spots. Even though it's sticky, it's still a pretty firm dough ball, and I want to add just a little more liquid. So I'm going to add about maybe a half a tablespoon more of milk and let that mix in, and then we'll check it again. Okay, I'm very happy now with how this dough ball is looking. It still has 14 minutes left on the raw dough cycle, and I'm going to let it go the entire time, and I will show you what this dough ball looks like at the end of the raw dough cycle. So there's 1 minute left on the raw dough cycle. I just wanted you to see how nice and smooth this dough ball is looking. And I wanted to talk about why we did not put the chocolate chips in the fruit and nut dispenser. Most bread machines, including this one, even the heating element comes on and warms the inside of the bread machine during the mixing and rising. If you were to put these chocolate chips in the fruit and nut dispenser, they would melt and they would not dispense properly. So we're going to put them in when the timer goes off to put in the fruit and nuts, the same timer, but we're going to do it manually because we don't want our chocolate chips to melt. So now we have a nice, beautiful, smooth dough ball. And what we're going to do is we're going to set our machine. We're going to go to menu option number 2, and we are going to choose the 2-pound loaf size, and we are going to go with a medium crust. You could go with the dark crust if you want to. I wouldn't use the light crust because this bread may not get done through and through if you chose light crust. And the dark crust, you are risking it burning because it does have more sugar in it, and sugar does burn more easily. So I'm going to go with the medium crust. That gives us 3 hours and 4 minutes on our machine, and I'm going to add a 30-minute, approximately 30 minutes, actually 26-minute reserve to that. So it goes to 3 hours and 30 minutes because I want to give this bread an extra rise as well. So then we're going to hit start and let the bread machine do its thing. Okay, so our little alarm has gone off and it is time to add in our chocolate chips into our bread. So I'm going to add a few, let it mix a little, add a few more. So now we have our chocolate chips mixed in, and our next thing will be to take the paddle out right before the final. So our final ferment has just begun. It just did the knockdown. I'm sorry I wasn't paying attention. I didn't get to catch that. I'm actually going to take this out so I can handle it better. And I am going to take the paddle out. Hopefully you can see this. Move that over. I'm going to get in here and take the paddle out. And I did oil my hands. I oiled my hands. So I'm just going to take this out and use my hands to shape it back into a ball and knock it down a little more because I don't want it to over rise. And it did rise really big. So if you ever taken your paddle out and you feel any really big air holes, you'll want to squeeze those out because those will leave big old holes in your bread. So I'm just pinching this together, squeezing it over, pinching it together on the bottom. All right, so now just going to put that right back down in there. Okay. And put it back. We'll come back when it's done. Yay, it is time to take the bread out. Oh, what a beautiful loaf. Look at this beautiful loaf of chocolate bread, chocolate cherry bread. It smells so good. Let's see if it's loose. Seems like it's ready to come out of the pan. It's kind of heavy, so I'm going to let it lay on its side. So our bread it's still a little bit warm, but it's cool enough, and we are going to slice into it and give it a taste. This bread smells so delicious. It smells like it's just the best chocolate smell. It just smells so delicious. And this bread has the most wonderful texture. I just wish you could feel it. It's really hard to describe it. It's just got the most wonderful texture. Look at this. And this would make wonderful toast, a wonderful peanut butter sandwich. Mmm. Mmm. Absolutely delicious. So I hope you'll give this bread a try. God bless. Bye-bye.